Emma's life had always been ordinary. She was a woman who carried herself with grace, a mother who had built her world around her son. After her husband died years ago, she had no choice but to be strong. She worked, cooked, managed the house, and gave Daniel everything she could. People in town often admired her calmness, her soft smile, her gentle voice. They said she had the strength of two people inside her. But Emma knew the truth. Strength was just another name for loneliness. Daniel had grown into a man now, tall, broad-shouldered, and kind. He had just returned from the city where he had been studying. Coming back home felt right to him, and for Emma, it was a blessing. She loved hearing his footsteps again, his laughter, the way he filled the silence of the old house. But with his return, Emma also noticed something different about him. His eyes lingered longer, his words carried more weight. And there was a quiet maturity about him that unsettled her. One evening, Emma was in her bedroom preparing to change her clothes. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the evening wind through the curtains. She slipped out of her blouse, letting it fall carelessly on the chair. She was unguarded, not thinking of anything except the comfort of slipping into something warm before dinner. The light from the window cast a soft glow on her skin. She thought she was alone, safe within the walls of her room, but then the door opened. Daniel walked in, his voice beginning to call for her, but stopping midway as his eyes met hers. For a second, time froze. Emma stood there with her blouse half off, her bare shoulder exposed. Daniel's eyes widened, his face turning pale, then flushed. The air grew thick, heavy with silence. Emma quickly pulled the blouse back over herself, her heart racing. "Daniel?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "You should knock." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. He just stood there, frozen, his chest rising and falling as if he couldn't breathe. His gaze wasn't one of a careless boy walking in by mistake. It was different. It was searching, heavy, filled with something Emma couldn't name. The room felt too small, too warm. Emma wanted to step away, but her feet didn't move. Daniel finally whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." His voice broke off as his eyes darted away. But not before Emma caught the storm in them. He left the room quickly. Shutting the door behind him, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the blouse tightly against her chest. She was shaking not from shame, but from the memory of his eyes. The look she had seen there wasn't simple embarrassment. It wasn't just a son's accidental glance. It was deeper, and that realization terrified her. The days that followed were restless for Emma. She tried to erase that moment from her mind. Tried to remind herself that Daniel was her son, her only child, the boy she had raised with her own hands. Yet the memory kept returning the way his gaze had lingered. The silence between them, the strange electricity that had filled the room. She noticed changes in him, too. He avoided her eyes when they sat for dinner, but when she wasn't looking, she could feel his gaze on her. When she spoke, he listened with unusual intensity, as if every word mattered. The air between them had shifted, and no matter how much Emma wanted to push it away. She COULDN, single quotes TDOA. One afternoon, Emma stood by the mirror, brushing her hair. She caught her reflection and paused. For years, she had seen herself as just a mother, a widow, someone who had left the best years of her life behind. But now, in the quiet of her room, she saw a woman. A woman with soft eyes, with lips that trembled when she thought of Daniel's gaze, with skin that still held warmth. She hated herself for noticing these things. Yet the truth was there, staring back at her. The house seemed to whisper with memories and silences. Every time Daniel entered the room, she felt a flutter in her chest, a rush of heat she tried to bury. She told herself it was wrong, that her mind was playing tricks. But deep down, she knew something had changed the moment he walked into her room that night. The strangest part was that Daniel had said nothing about it. He hadn't tried to explain, hadn't laughed it off, hadn't even brought it up. His silence made it worse, made it heavier, because it meant he was carrying something too. Emma felt trapped in that silence with him. One evening, she stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. She heard his footsteps approaching, steady and slow. Her hands trembled slightly as he came in. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma looked away too quickly. But she knew he remembered. He hadn't forgotten. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts ran in circles, her heart refusing to rest. She remembered the first time she had held Daniel in her arms. How small he had been, how she had promised to protect him forever. And now he was grown, a man with feelings she wasn't prepared to face. She closed her eyes tightly, whispering to herself, "This is wrong. This is not real. It was just an accident." But her heart argued back. Then why did his eyes look like that? Why do you feel this way now? The question haunted her. The next morning, she tried to act normal, serving breakfast, speaking casually, smiling as if nothing had happened. But the tension between them was like a shadow that followed everywhere. Daniel's silence spoke louder than words. Emma realized that life as she knew it had shifted. It wasn't just a small accident, not just a moment to forget. Something had awakened that night, something she could not name, something she feared, yet something she could not deny. And deep inside, Emma knew the truth. The door that opened that evening wasn't just the door to her bedroom. It was the door to a path neither of them had expected. A path filled with longing, fear, and the possibility of heartbreak. But it had begun, and there was no going back. The days after that night were filled with a silence that Emma could not escape. It followed her into the kitchen, into the garden, even into her dreams. Daniel had changed. His presence was still gentle, still kind, but there was a new heaviness around him, like a storm waiting for release. He no longer laughed as freely, and when he did, it felt forced. As though he was hiding something behind it, Emma tried to fill the silence with ordinary tasks. She cleaned the house more than usual, cooked meals with extra care, and asked Daniel about his work, his friends, his future. But his answers were brief, and his eyes never truly met hers. When she looked at him across the dinner table, she saw a man who was holding back, a man carrying words he was afraid to speak. One evening, Emma stood by the window as the sun dipped behind the hills. The sky was painted with orange and purple, but her heart was restless. She remembered the way Daniel had looked at her that night, the way his gaze had burned into her like a secret. She had told herself over and over that it was nothing, that it meant nothing. But the truth was harder to ignore each day. She could feel him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. She could feel his silence pressing against her chest. And worst of all, she could feel her own heart answering that silence. One afternoon, Emma was folding laundry in the living room when Daniel walked in. His steps were slow, almost hesitant. He stood there for a moment watching her, then finally spoke. His voice was soft, trembling. "Mom, can we talk?" Emma froze. She looked up at him, her hands clutching a shirt she hadn't finished folding. Something in his tone made her heart race. She nodded slowly, unsure if she was ready to hear what he had to say. Daniel sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly together. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That night, when I walked into your room," his voice cracked. He looked up, meeting her eyes at last. "I didn't just see you as my mother. I saw you differently, and I can't stop thinking about it." Emma's breath caught. The room seemed to spin. She wanted to stop him, to silence the words before they left his lips, but it was too late. They were out, heavy and real. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you shouldn't say that. You don't understand what you're doing." But he leaned forward, his eyes desperate, filled with emotion. "I do understand. I've felt it for a long time. I just never said it. That night, it broke something inside me. I can't pretend anymore." Emma's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. She wanted to scold him, to remind him of boundaries, to remind herself of who she was and who he was. But the truth was, her silence betrayed her. Because deep inside, she wasn't only afraid of what Daniel felt, she was afraid of what she herself was beginning to feel. She stood up suddenly, unable to sit any longer. She walked to the window, staring out at the garden as though the flowers could give her an answer. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the glass. "Daniel, this isn't right. You're my son. I raised you. How can you even think this way?" Behind her, his voice came low and broken. Because you're not just my mother. You're the only person who has ever truly loved me. The only one who has ever been there. And I can't stop seeing you as more than that. Emma closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to erase the moment entirely. But his words pierced her heart in ways she didn't expect. Because she understood that loneliness, that ache. She had carried it herself for years. The room grew unbearably silent. She turned back to face him, her eyes red. Daniel, if we go down this path, it will destroy us. It will break everything we've built. He stood then, his eyes shining with pain. Maybe it will. But maybe? It's the only truth we've ever had. Emma's knees weakened. She wanted to collapse, to hide, to bury herself under the weight of it all. Instead, she walked past him, her shoulder brushing his arm, and left the room without another word. She went to her bedroom, locked the door, and let herself cry until she couldn't breathe. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too full of ghosts. She sat by the edge of her bed, staring at the candle flickering on her nightstand. The flame swayed with every whisper of wind, reminding her of her heart, fragile, unsteady, on the verge of being blown out. She remembered the years after her husband's death, the endless nights of emptiness, the way she had buried every longing deep inside. She had told herself she would never feel again, never open her heart, never break her own rules. And yet here she was, trembling at the sound of her son's voice, aching at the sight of his eyes. The next day, Emma tried to avoid him. She busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes with too much force, sweeping the floors though they were already clean. But avoidance only made the air heavier. Daniel was quiet, moving through the house like a shadow, his silence more painful than words. In the evening, Emma went out to the garden. The roses were in bloom, their scent filling the air. She knelt down, touching the petals gently, as though the flowers could calm her restless soul. She didn't hear Daniel approach until his voice broke the silence. "Mom!" She turned, startled. He stood behind her, his hands clenched at his sides, his face pale with emotion. "I can't live like this," he said softly. "Pretending nothing's there. Pretending I don't feel what I feel." Emma's chest tightened. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears again. "Daniel, please. Don't say it. Don't make this harder." But he stepped closer, his voice shaking. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's the truth. And I know you feel it too." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to deny it, to shout at him, to push him away. But her silence betrayed her once again, because the truth was written in her eyes, in the way her hands trembled, in the way her heart beat when he was near. For a long moment, they just stood there in the garden, the evening sky wrapping around them. The world seemed to hold its breath. Emma felt the pull of his presence, the warmth of his nearness, the danger of her own weakness. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel, this path will only bring pain. You're my son, this love. It can't be." But even as she said the words, her heart ached with a longing she could no longer deny. The roses swayed in the wind, their petals trembling as though the garden itself knew the secret they were holding. Emma turned away, unable to face him any longer, her tears falling silently onto the earth. And in that moment, she realized the truth she had been running from. Something inside her had awakened, something she couldn't control, something that terrified her. The silence between them had spoken, louder than words ever could. And Emma knew their lives would never be the same again. The storm came suddenly, rolling across the hills like a dark wave. By evening, the sky had turned black, and thunder cracked through the silence of the small house. Rain fell hard against the windows, the sound filling every corner. Emma lit a candle in the living room when the power went out. The flickering flame threw shadows on the walls, making the house feel smaller, more intimate. Daniel entered quietly. He had been restless all day, pacing from one room to another, avoiding her eyes but never truly leaving her presence. Now, as the rain pounded outside, he stood in the doorway, watching her with a look that was both uncertain and determined. Emma sat on the sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The candlelight softened her face, but her heart was far from calm. She could feel his gaze heavy and unspoken, and it made her chest tighten. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence for them. Finally, Daniel moved closer, sitting across from her. His voice was low, shaking slightly. "Mom, we can't go on like this. Pretending nothing's happening. Pretending we don't feel what we feel." Emma's breath caught. She wanted to protest, to stop him, but the truth was, she was tired of pretending too. Her voice trembled. "Daniel, you don't understand what you're saying. This isn't just about feelings. This could destroy us." He leaned forward, his eyes shining with emotion. "Destroy us, or free us. I've lived my whole life loving you in silence in ways I didn't even understand before. That night when I walked in, it was like the truth finally broke free. I can't bury it anymore." Emma closed her eyes, her tears threatening to spill. "You're my son," she whispered. "I raised you. I can't let this become something else. It's wrong, Daniel. It's dangerous." But Daniel's voice grew firmer, steadier. "I'm not a child anymore. I'm a man, and I know what I feel. And I see it in you too. You're scared, but I can't ignore what's between us. Not anymore." The room was filled with the sound of rain, like 1,000 whispers pressing against the walls. Emma felt her body trembling, her heart pulled in two directions. Part of her wanted to run to escape this conversation forever. But another part, the part she had buried for years, longed to stay, longed to hear the words she had been too afraid to say herself. She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, what you're asking for will cost us everything. People wouldn't understand. They'd judge us, hate us. And maybe they'd be right." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "Maybe they would. But what about us? What about the truth that's been sitting in this house unspoken for so long? Don't we deserve to live honestly, even if it's hard?" Emma's tears finally fell. She looked at his hand, so close to hers, and her heart ached. She remembered the nights she had cried alone. The years of silence after her husband died, the way she had buried every dream of love deep inside herself. She had told herself she didn't need it anymore, that her life was complete with Daniel by her side. But now she realized she had been lying to herself. She was still a woman with a heart, a woman who longed to be seen, to be loved, to be touched not just as a mother, but as herself. The candle flickered between them, its light dancing across their faces. Emma's voice was soft, broken. "You don't know how hard this is for me. Every part of me is fighting against it. And yet I can't deny it anymore either." That night, something changed inside me too. Daniel's eyes widened, relief and pain mixing together. "Then don't fight it, Mom. Don't push me away. We've both been alone for too long." Emma's heart pounded. She knew that crossing this line would change everything forever. There would be no going back, no pretending again. It would bind them together in a way the world would never accept. And yet when she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw love not childish, not fleeting, but deep, desperate, and real. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his fingers. The contact was small, fragile, but it sent a shiver through both of them. Daniel's breath caught, his eyes locking with hers. The storm outside roared louder, as if the world itself was bearing witness to the moment. Emma whispered, almost to herself, "Why does it feel like this was always meant to happen?" Daniel leaned closer, his voice raw. "Because it was. We've been living half-lives. Mom, maybe this is the only way to feel whole." Emma pulled her hand back suddenly, tears spilling again. She stood up, pacing the room, clutching her arms around herself. "No, if we give in to this, it will consume us. It will break us. I can't let you destroy your life for me." Daniel stood too, his voice desperate now. "It's my choice, my life, and I choose you, no matter what anyone says, no matter what it costs." Emma shook her head, torn between longing and fear. Her voice cracked. "You don't know what you're saying. You think love is enough, but the world will never forgive us. And I don't know if I could forgive myself. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the window. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Then don't think about the world. Don't think about tomorrow. Just think about us, here, now. Isn't that enough? Emma's tears blurred her vision. She wanted to say no, to end it, to walk away. But her heart betrayed her again. Her silence spoke louder than any words. They stood there, inches apart, the candle flickering between them. The storm roaring outside. The moments stretched, heavy and unbroken, until Emma whispered, "Daniel, if we take this step, there's no turning back." He looked into her eyes, his voice steady. "I don't want to turn back." Emma's body trembled, her heart caught in the war between right and wrong, love and fear. She reached for the candle, her fingers brushing against it, and the flame wavered. For a moment, she thought of blowing it out, of ending everything, of burying the truth once again. But she didn't. The candle burned on, casting its fragile light on two souls caught in a storm greater than either of them had ever faced. Emma closed her eyes, her tears falling silently. She knew that whatever happened next, their lives would never be the same again. And as the thunder shook the sky, she whispered words that sealed their fate. "Nothing will ever be the same."